A respected professor at Tulane University, Sheila was known for her intelligence, her dedication to teaching, and her seemingly perfect life. She had a charming husband, two beautiful children, and a home in the quiet suburbs of New Orleans. From the outside, her world appeared picture perfect, a life many would envy. But appearances can deceive. In her classroom sat Mike, a bright, charismatic young man with a curiosity for learning and an unshakable fascination with his professor. Their connection was undeniable, an invisible thread pulling them closer with every passing day. Sheila, the woman who held her world together so meticulously, started to change. Quiet smiles grew into lingering conversations. Shared confidences turned into whispered secrets. Lines blurred. A relationship blossomed, defying the boundaries society had drawn, challenging the roles they were meant to play. Yet hidden behind the lectures and the love notes was a truth far more complicated, a marriage filled with pain, control, and fear. When her husband discovered the affair, the fallout wasn't just emotional, it was deadly. What drove Sheila to risk it all? Was this a love story born from desperation, or was something far more dangerous unfolding? This is the story of Sheila and Mike, a forbidden connection that ended in tragedy. Welcome to True Crime Files, where we bring you stories that blur the line between right and wrong, tales that uncover the complexities of human choices and their often devastating consequences. If you have a fascination for narratives of love, betrayal, and justice, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Today we bring you the story of Sheila and Mike, a narrative that begins in the lecture halls of Tulane University and unravels into a tale of forbidden affection, desperation, and loss. At its core, this is a story about the collision of two lives, a married professor grappling with the turmoil in her own home, and a young student drawn to her in ways neither of them anticipated. It's a story that forces us to question what freedom truly means and what happens when the pursuit of it crosses ethical and moral boundaries. Was this a connection forged by fate, or a consequence of two people searching for solace in the wrong places? As we uncover the layers of this heartbreaking case, remember every choice has its price, and in this story, the cost was unthinkable. Sheila Harper was a woman who seemed to have it all. A respected professor at Tulane University in New Orleans, a devoted mother to two children, and a wife to Johnson Harper, a man who many would describe as charming and successful. At 38, Sheila's life looked picture perfect, the kind of existence that others might admire from a distance, but appearances rarely tell the full story. Behind the walls of her suburban home, Sheila faced a reality far removed from the image she presented to the world. Her marriage was a fragile facade, held together by fear rather than love. Johnson, the man she once trusted, had become a source of pain. Emotional wounds were deepened by physical scars. Threats of violence loomed over every disagreement. Johnson had made it clear, if Sheila ever left, she would pay a price far greater than she could bear. This was the life Sheila endured, a daily existence marked by silence and survival. Until the day she met Mike. Mike was a new face in her classroom, a 21-year-old student whose presence seemed unremarkable to others. But to Sheila, he was different. From the moment their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. He noticed her sadness, the kind that no smile could truly hide. And in his youthful curiosity, he felt a pull toward her, a desire not just to know her, but to comfort her. It started with small moments, a shared glance, a lingering pause after class, then tentative conversations that stretched longer than they should. In Mike, Sheila found someone who listened without judgment, who seemed to see her not as a professor or a wife, but as a person weighed down by burdens she could no longer carry alone. As their connection deepened, so did the questions. What was it about this young man that made Sheila begin to lower the walls she had so carefully built? What was it about him that made her willing to risk everything she had left? Was it love, desperation, or simply the need to feel alive again in a life that had grown unbearable? These were questions Sheila might not have been able to answer herself. But in the months that followed, her choices would set her on a path from which there was no turning back. Sheila and Mike's connection, once innocent and tentative, began to shift into something neither of them could ignore. What started as moments stolen between lectures turned into long, private conversations. Sheila found herself saying things she had never spoken aloud before. She confided in Mike about her life at home, the emotional scars, the threats that kept her in a marriage she no longer believed in, and the hopelessness that had taken root in her heart. Mike listened. He didn't interrupt or judge. He offered her something she hadn't felt in years, understanding. And in his quiet way, he made her feel seen, not as a professor, not as a mother, but as a person who had been hurting for far too long. As weeks turned into months, their emotional intimacy deepened. Words gave way to actions, and soon Sheila and Mike found themselves drawn into an affair that neither could stop. They became adept at hiding their relationship, meeting in motel rooms far from campus, places where they could leave their responsibilities and fears behind, if only for a little while. For Sheila, those stolen hours were a reprieve, a chance to feel joy in a life that had been defined by pain. She began to change. Friends and colleagues noticed her smiling more, dressing with a confidence she hadn't shown in years. She started taking better care of herself, working out, eating healthier, and speaking with a lightness that hadn't been there before. Do you believe love justifies breaking the rules? Let us know with a like if you agree, or a comment if you disagree. But change doesn't go unnoticed. Johnson, her husband, had grown accustomed to the version of Sheila he could control, the one who bent under his threats and demands. This new Sheila was different, and it unsettled him. He began to watch her more closely, searching for the reason behind her transformation. He didn't have to look far. Sheila's phone, once a tool she used without concern, became a source of tension. Johnson started noticing her guarding it more than usual, taking calls in hushed tones and quickly closing messages when he entered the room. His suspicion grew, and with it, his need to uncover the truth. It wasn't long before he found what he was looking for. The messages between Sheila and Mike told him everything he needed to know. Their affection was clear in every word, their plans outlined in every exchange. For Johnson, it wasn't just betrayal, it was a challenge to the control he had held over Sheila for so long. He knew what he had to do. In his mind, this wasn't just about reclaiming his wife. It was about proving that no one could take what was his, and with that thought, the wheels of an irreversible tragedy were set in motion. Johnson Harper had always been a man who prided himself on control. His household, his marriage, his wife, everything operated under his command. So when Sheila began to change, when her smiles no longer felt like they belonged to him, he couldn't ignore the unsettling thought creeping into his mind. Something was different. At first he dismissed it as paranoia. Sheila was his wife, after all. Where could she go? What could she do that he wouldn't know about? But the changes became harder to overlook. She was distant, guarded, protective of her phone in ways she had never been before. The late nights, the quick glances at her screen, the hushed phone calls, none of it sat right with him. It didn't take long for Johnson to act. Waiting wasn't his style. One night, when Sheila was distracted, he grabbed her phone. What he found changed everything. The messages were there. Intimate words, plans for future meetings, and confessions of love, all exchanged with someone named Mike. The pieces clicked into place, and the realization hit him like a blow. What would you do if you were in Sheila's shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. But Johnson didn't confront Sheila, not immediately. Instead, he planned. He read through the messages carefully, studied the way they wrote to each other, and then, using her phone, he became her. He messaged Mike, crafting a response in Sheila's tone. He suggested a meeting at their usual motel, a place where they could be alone. Mike agreed, without hesitation. Johnson's trap was set. The day of the meeting, Johnson arrived at the motel early. The room was quiet, unassuming. He waited, pacing the floor, rehearsing the words he would say, the tone he would use. He told himself he just wanted to talk, to scare the young man away, to make it clear that Sheila was his and his alone. When Mike arrived, He was expecting Sheila. He walked into the room with a smile that faded the moment he saw Johnson standing there. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Mike froze, the door closing behind him. Johnson wasted no time. His words were sharp, his tone cold. He accused Mike of ruining his marriage, of disrespecting him. Mike, startled and confused, tried to explain, to apologize, but Johnson wasn't interested in apologies. The conversation escalated quickly, both men's voices rising, their emotions boiling over. Mike, young and impassioned, refused to back down. He defended Sheila, telling Johnson she deserved better, that she deserved to be loved and respected. Those words were gasoline on an already raging fire. Johnson, consumed by anger, lashed out. The argument turned physical. Johnson pushed Mike, who stumbled but didn't fall. Mike retaliated, shoving Johnson back. The struggle became chaotic, the two men grappling in a confined space filled with tension and fury. And then, it happened. In the chaos, Mike tripped, losing his balance. His head struck the edge of the bed with a sickening thud. The room fell silent. Johnson froze, staring at Mike's motionless body on the floor. The anger that had fueled him moments before was replaced by a cold, creeping dread. He knelt beside Mike, shaking him, calling his name, but it was no use. Mike was gone. What had started as a confrontation meant to scare had ended in tragedy. Johnson didn't know what to do. He left the room in a haze, the reality of what had happened refusing to fully settle in. When Sheila heard the news, she was devastated. The man who had given her hope, who had made her feel alive again, was gone. The investigation that followed was swift. The evidence pointed clearly to Johnson, and he was arrested, charged with Mike's death. But questions remained. Was this simply a crime of passion, a jealous husband pushed too far? Or was it something deeper, a man whose need for control drove him to a breaking point? The answers may never fully be known, but one thing was certain. Lives had been shattered, and the consequences of one fatal encounter would echo long after the motel room fell silent. The news came to Sheila Harper on an unremarkable afternoon. She was in her office, sorting through papers, when the call came. At first, the officer's words didn't register. Mike was dead. Dead. The word echoed in her mind, unfamiliar and unreal. Her knees buckled, and she sank into her chair, clutching the phone as if holding on to it could keep her from falling further. The guilt hit her immediately. This wasn't just grief, it was something heavier, something sharper. She replayed every decision, every moment that led her to this point. She had allowed herself to believe that Mike was her escape, her chance to feel human again. And now, he was gone. The police investigation unfolded swiftly. The messages on Sheila's phone told the story of the affair and, ultimately, led them to Johnson. The officers pieced together the events that transpired in the motel room. Sheila was questioned, each query pulling her deeper into a reality she wished she could escape. When the truth emerged, it painted a damning picture. Johnson's control over Sheila, his jealousy, and his calculated decision to impersonate her for that fatal meeting became impossible to ignore. The evidence left no room for doubt. Johnson was arrested, and the trial that followed was brief but harrowing. He was sentenced to prison, the weight of his actions sealing his fate. For Sheila, the aftermath was not one of relief. She was free from Johnson's control, but the cost of that freedom was unimaginable. Mike's death loomed over her, a shadow she couldn't escape. She struggled to reconcile her emotions, grief for the man who had loved her, anger at the husband who had stolen him away, and shame for the choices that had brought them all to this point. Her days became a series of small, quiet battles. She had 2 children who needed her, who were grappling with their own confusion and pain. Sheila had to become their anchor, even as she felt herself drifting. She went back to her teaching, throwing herself into her work as a way to keep moving forward. But every lecture hall reminded her of Mike, of the moments they had shared and the path they had walked together. The community around her whispered. Tulane University was no stranger to scandal, but Sheila's story was different. It wasn't just an affair, It was a tragedy that had unfolded in their midst. Some were sympathetic, others judgmental. Sheila learned to live with the stares, the questions, and the isolation. She began therapy, a step toward healing that felt both necessary and overwhelming. Through the sessions, she explored the depths of her pain, her choices, and her resilience. The counselor encouraged her to find forgiveness, not just for Johnson, but for herself. It was a process that would take years, one that Sheila was only beginning to understand. As time passed, she began to rebuild her life piece by fragile piece. She focused on her children, determined to give them stability and love, even as she navigated her own brokenness. She made a quiet vow to herself. She would not let her past define her. But there were nights when the weight of it all was too much, when she would sit alone in her living room, staring at the photo of Mike she kept tucked away in a drawer. She would remember his laugh, his kindness, and the way he had made her feel seen. And she would wonder, what if? The aftermath of this story is not one of closure, but of endurance. Sheila Harper remains a woman marked by tragedy, but also by the strength it takes to keep going. Hers is a story of consequences, of choices, and of the human capacity to survive even the most unimaginable pain. In the quiet moments, she still thinks of Mike, of what might have been, had their paths crossed in another life. But those are thoughts she keeps to herself. For now, she moves forward, step by careful step, holding on to the hope that one day she might find peace. Sheila Harper's story is one of complexity and contradiction. It begins with a woman trapped in a life of abuse, yearning for a way out. Her husband, Johnson, wielded control with an iron grip, leaving Sheila isolated, fearful, and desperate for a connection that made her feel alive. Enter Mike, a young man who saw her pain and reached out, offering comfort, understanding, and something Sheila hadn't felt in years: hope. Their relationship, unconventional and taboo, became her sanctuary. But love, even when born from genuine affection, doesn't come without consequences. When Johnson discovered the affair, the carefully concealed world Sheila had built came crashing down. The confrontation he orchestrated ended in tragedy, leaving Mike dead, Johnson imprisoned, and Sheila carrying the weight of guilt and grief. It's a story that raises uncomfortable questions. Was Sheila a victim of circumstance, caught in a web spun by her abusive husband? Or did her choices play a role in the events that unfolded? And yet life goes on. Sheila, now a single mother, is left to pick up the pieces, striving to create a future for herself and her children while haunted by the past. In our next episode, we'll unravel the chilling tale of a missing millionaire whose secrets would lead to one of the most shocking revelations ever uncovered. Don't miss it. If this story captivated you, don't forget to show your support by giving this video a thumbs up and sharing it with friends who love true crime as much as you do. Your engagement helps us bring more stories to life. Subscribe to True Crime Files for more riveting tales of love, betrayal, and the pursuit of justice. Turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.